Hello everyone, my name is Anthony. I am a senior software developer and I run a tech startup. And what I want to show you guys today is a very quick introduction to Figma as a developer. Why do you want to use Figma as a developer? Because you might be trying to build something yourself and you want it to look somewhat good. And Figma is built by developers and it's almost like it's built for developers. It'll come really intuitively to you. And I'm going to show you all the features that I wish I knew when I was starting to use Figma as a developer. And it will sort of click really well with you if you already know how to code. It should come sort of natural to you. And this video is really intended to be as quick as possible. And I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of things. And by no means am I a UX developer. I suck at UX, I just know how to use Figma. So we're gonna hop over and switch over and you'll be able to see here that I actually have a site. This is my latest startup I launched and this design, I made it on Figma and it saved me a lot of time. When you create things on Figma and put it into code afterwards, you don't have to think about the actual design while you are coding. Therefore, it saves so much time, especially if you're a front-end developer. And it's a lot easier to check how things might look. You can move things around a lot easier and it's very intuitive. And as you can see, this is how the homepage looked when I designed it in Figma. And then obviously I added a real image, took out the boilerplate stuff, and it came out pretty similar, if you ask me. So the first part about Figma is to realize that a lot of the stuff is actually publicly available. So for example, if you go to Figma/community, there is a files and templates tab, and you can actually go ahead while you're on this page, just like search for whatever you are looking for. So if you're trying to build a SaaS, you can find like people that have free SaaS designs on here and you can start from somewhere. However, as a developer, it might be less, it might not work as well because you are going to have to, let's say you choose this one, you're going to have to make all these random components that some guy made in Figma, and the code design might not be standardized and stuff like that. So what I do recommend is if you are using a front-end UI library like Material UI or Shad CN, you can simply just find, for the big ones, they'll usually have one, a design system either made by the owners of the library or by someone who is a fan of the library. And they will do stuff like what they did for ShadCN, which is they will make a Figma component, which we'll get into in just a second, for every single actual component that you might find within the code itself. So you don't need to go ahead and do something like make a button on Figma from scratch that looks exactly like your ShadCN button. You can just copy this one. Super, super, super helpful. You'll save so much time. The designs will be consistent with what you're actually coding because you're using that library. And if there's anything missing, there are some things missing from the ShadCN one, but the Material UI one is very well encapsulated. You can just sort of copy and paste some of the other components and try to make it up or simply change the colors. Now, let's get into actually using Figma itself. You'll see that when you sign up, you'll be able to start a project and your project has a couple of files. When you're on the free tier, you can use a couple of these, I think up to 3 of these files, and each file, once you get into it, looks like this. And you can see on the left side, we have pages. I can't really zoom in, but you have these quote pages, and you're only allowed 3 of these pages on the free plan, but not to worry, you can put like an infinite amount of stuff in here. So I have one page called pages where I actually keep all the pages, the different pages of the applications and stuff like that, as you can see. Then I have one page for all the common components that I use within the actual Figma designs. And then I have one for like archives and random stuff. As you can see, this is like my attempt at making something before I actually started using the UI pack and stuff like that from ShadCN. So let's get into how it actually works. The semantics of the platform itself, it's very drag and drop. You see here at the top menu, the top thing is what's called a frame. And usually your top level item is going to be your frame. So in this case, you can have a frame over here. I'm going to go ahead and make a frame and I'm just going to set, I'm going to, when I click on frame over here, you can click on the right side and choose what type of like display you want. So you can either like draw like a custom rectangle if you like that. But for example, if you're designing something for like a MacBook Pro or a desktop screen, you could just click desktop and it'll make a pretty standard 1440 by 1024 pixel thing. So you can see that. And if you wanted to increase the height, on the right side is where you sort of control things. So fill is just going to be the background color. You can change it to whatever you want. Height is going to be H. So if I wanted this to be like 20, like, I don't know, 96 for some reason, it would be able to do that. X and Y is just the position on the actual page itself. You probably won't be messing around with that too much. If you want to round the borders, you simply click this little rounded thing and you can add like 40px rounded borders. And that's pretty much like the basics of it. Stroke is just going to be your border. And then effects, I don't really use that much. It's not really like in the basic wheelhouse. So once you have this, let's say, for example, we want to apply like a background color. So as you can see, I have a list of colors to choose here. And these colors are not random and they're not built into Figma. In fact, if you just don't click on anything, so you click anywhere, you'll see here I have something called local styles. These local styles allow you to declare commonly used colors and font variants. So, for example, in my application, you can see this text right here is a standard H1. And that H1 might be, 40 pixels, it might be bold, and it might be a certain font. Well, in Figma, you can also go back over here to local styles, create a new text style, and you can name it. So let's call this like H1. We can choose the font. We can choose like whether it's going to be bold or not. And we can choose this to 40px. And that way, when you are actually building your Figma designs, you should make sure all your text pretty much inherits from one of these fonts. So let's go ahead and draw a piece of text here. And I'm going to say like, hello world. You can see here, it's already by default an H1, but if I wanted to make it an H3 or whatever I wanted to make it, it will pretty much just be whatever I want it to be. Now you'll notice that the actual box for Hello World is a bit big, and we'll get to that in just a second on how to make it so that it wraps and hugs the text. But essentially, what we can make sure is that the Hello World is in this desktop one little subcategory. So if I were to move it out, you would see that it's still in the same place. Will even let me. It's still in the same place, but it's no longer relative to the desktop. We want to put it inside the desktop. And naming things and grouping things and keeping them organized is going to be super important when you're working with Figma, the same as when you are working in code. So let's say we want to have Hello World, and then below it, we're going to have another piece of text that says like, let's make this like a paragraph style. This, and we'll move it down a bit. Oops. Which one was it? This one. Let's move that down. And we'll say like, this is my first Figma app. Now we want to group these. Let's say we want to call this like top item or something like that. What we can do is we can go ahead and click Command G. You can right click it and click group selection, but the hotkey for it if you're on a Mac is Command G, and it's probably like Control G if you're on a Windows. And that will group it. And we can call this like top text. Now here's where the cool part comes in. If you're familiar with CSS and like Flexbox, you can actually sort of code things, or you can use Figma in the same way that you would use Flex. And the way you declare a Flexbox is through what they call an auto layout. So if you right click this and you click create auto layout, add auto layout, bam, you'll see that it just created some auto layout and it moved my text in a certain way. Now, you'll notice that over here, the actual width and height of both of these texts are different. And what this did, essentially, just like if you're doing HTML, because the width of like the inner, each div is sort of big, when you stack those two divs on top of each other, they're gonna separate them by the width. So first of all, let's go ahead and make this the width and the height. You'll see we have an option here now. Let's make it to hug contents for both of these things. So you can see now that for this first Hello World, the width and the height, they're fixed, but they're no longer malleable. And if I were to be like, add an exclamation mark, you'll see that the width changes depending on how many characters there are. So it hugs the actual text, whereas before it was fixed. Now let's do it for this as well. Let's change it from a fixed width and height to hug. Hug essentially means like, yeah, it just takes up as much space as it needs to. It fills pretty much the minimum of the content. So now if we come over here to our auto layout, which we can rename this, oh, whoops, I already did rename this to top text. So we can click it and we can do a couple of things. First of all, do you want it to be flex column, AKA in a column on top of each other? Or do you want it to be horizontal, AKA beside each other, right? If you want it to wrap, you can define, for example, a width and height for it to wrap on. So if we changed the width of the actual auto layout to maybe a fixed width, and we said maybe the fixed width was 300 while it's on wrap, you can see here that it will wrap. And you can click these little icons here to act as your like justify and align content. So if you want it to justify and align in the center, you click align center. If you want it to be on the top center, so let's give this a height of like 100, for example. If you want it to be right in the middle, so it aligns in the middle both lengthwise and widthwise, if that makes sense, vertically and horizontally in the middle, you just click in the middle. Yeah, it's pretty intuitive once you start clicking around with it, but that's essentially what it can do. So let's move this back to hug content, and let's change this back to on top of each other instead of beside each other. Now we can control the actual gap. So the gap between the items is just going to be this little icon right here. And you'll see when we switch it to horizontal, it will be horizontal gap. When it's vertical, it'll be a vertical gap. And when it is wrapping, it has a horizontal and a vertical gap. So if you imagine we had 3 items, let's add a third item here. And then I'm going to make it so that the width is of fixed width. And we're going to say maybe of 150 pixels. Whoops, that is the text that I have selected. Let's go back to the auto layout and make the width fixed and make it like 300 pixels. You'll see here that because none of these texts can actually fit on its own level, it will stack on top of each other. But as soon as we start opening it, you'll see that it'll fill the available space. And we can add some padding horizontally between the items, and we can add some gap vertically between the items as well, as you can see here. So it's sort of like using grid if you've used grid in CSS. And that's pretty much all it is. Now, the next thing you have here is going to be horizontal padding, which I'm sure you're all familiar with if you've done CSS, and vertical padding as well. And just by these couple tools, you can make almost any design that you need to using it. You can do things like nest it. So let's say I had 2 things that were like this. We can go ahead and I'm going to take these 2 text groups. I'm going to Control G to create a new group for it. I'll call this text groups. And now I can create an auto layout. So I'm going to pretty much put them in a div. I've put them in a div. I've grouped them up. Now I'm going to make that div flex. And I'm going to say, you know what? Instead of on top of each other, I want them beside each other. And that is pretty much how you can make it sort of like scalable, if that makes sense. And that is why, for example, you can see here I have this component where I have a bunch of like creator profile icons. Well, the actual container for this profile is a auto layout, and it has the wrap ability. And you can see the width of it is fill, aka it fills the container. It tries to fill up the whole page. And you can see it doesn't go end to end because the page itself has some padding. But if I were to show you me adding a new profile card, you would see that the actual height, while the width is fill, the height is hug, which means that it is going to just be the height that it needs to be to contain all the cards. If I were to add more cards, for example, to fill this up, but then make it wrap another row, you'll see that it will automatically, get it? Because it's magic, the company name is Magic. It will automatically push down all the other content as well as increase the height of my frame to accommodate for the new item, because my frame has the vertical size of my frame is hug, which means it will just take up as much space as all the stuff inside of it. And because this whole page is now also an auto layout, it knows to move everything else below it down the same way that your HTML would if you added an element between 2 other elements. It knows to sort of move them to the right or to the left. So when I first started using Figma, I didn't know any of this. And I was just sitting here hard coding pixel values, trying to line everything up. Every time I would change something small, like adding another line here or adding another item here, I would have to realign everything else in the application. And it took me hours to make simple designs. But now that I know that, and I know the fact that you can copy and paste things from like other repos, it has saved me so much time. Now there's one other thing that's super important to know as a developer. So if you're paying for, first of all, if you're paying for Figma like Pro, you get access to this little button here called developer mode. It is pretty helpful. I don't have developer mode because I'm not paying for it, but when you do, you will be able to click on something like, for example, this text, and it will give you a full breakdown of like the font height, the font size, the color, the bolding. It will pretty much give you like the CSS you need in order to just copy and paste that straight into your application. Like I said, my stuff is all standardized. My code is all standardized on the front end with components. So I don't need to do anything like that. Like I just use the H1 variant and I already know what all the styles is. But if you are working at a company and you're using the company Figma and things aren't standardized, this has been a lifesaver for me in the past. Okay, so on to the next groundbreaking feature that I was talking about. It is components. You can actually, just like in React, you can make components out of Figma stuff. For example, remember that profile card we had back there? That's actually a component that I defined over here. And the things that stay the same in a component are things like the layout, the actual padding, the structure of it. But in the actual page itself, if you are using a component, you can change things like the text. Like, let's say instead of my Instagram username, you wanted someone else's, like, I don't know, my friend me so dope. You can go ahead and change that and it will like not mess with the father component, so to speak. So there are some things you can change in a component, like the text, the color and stuff like that, that won't mess with the father component. So let's go ahead and try making a component. So first of all, I'm going to make a copy of this just to show you how easy it is. And okay, so here you are. Let's say I just have like a little frame or an auto layout of a rectangle with some stuff inside of it. You're going to right click the parent component or the parent like container, and you're going to click create component, and you'll see something as a component. I don't know if like you can see it. I can't zoom in, but it has like this little like 4 diamond icon over here. And that's how you know it is the parent component. Now let's go ahead and like style this up. Let's say I want to like make it a bit different. I'm going to make one card where the difference between this and this is that my profile picture is going to be on the right instead of on the left. Now, what we can do is we can Control-C to copy the parent component. And now if I wanted to come over here and let's add some more stuff over to our thing, I can go ahead and like, let's add it to the text group and let's make this wrap. I can go ahead and add this, and you can see over here that the actual profile card bleeds over, and the only thing we need to do that is to make this a fixed width. As you can see, it doesn't, or sorry, not fixed width, to fill the container. As you can see, it doesn't give us that option because the parent container isn't an auto layout, which is our frame. So let's go ahead and make our frame an auto layout. Then when I come back here, it now has the option to fill container. And you can see that it will go and sort of fill over to the next line. Over here, let's add some padding just so it doesn't look like poo-poo. And then there we go. And let's also make it so that our top text again is aligned to the top right. And same for this one, just so it's like really easy to see like what's going on here with the wrap. So now you can see when I pasted these new profile cards in, they show up on the left side as like an empty like diamond, an empty purple diamond. And that's how you know that it is a child of a component. And you can see here, I can come in here to this child component. I could do something like I said before. I can change the username. I can change the username, but if I wanted to move this over, you'll see it does not actually let me like change the ordering and move the avatar to the top, because that would be changing the layout itself of the component. If I wanted to do that for just one case, what you can do is right click it and click detach instance. And now this will act as if it was just like a regular like Figma component type of thing that you never had to like use in the first place, or it wasn't attached to a main thing in the first place. But for all the other stuff, you don't really need to worry about detaching it, because like the color, the text and stuff like that, as long as the layout is the same, you should be good. And honestly, with those few tips, all you really need to do is just get into Figma, practice actually making stuff. Those things, like if I knew those things, I would have by far saved a lot of hours when it came to actually making Figma designs. Like I said, I was doing things all kinds of ways, creating fixed pixel perfect heights and stuff like that. And it also makes it super easy when you learn auto layout to like make a mobile design. All you do is just create pretty much like duplicate this. So I'll copy and paste this and then just change the actual thing to be smaller. So let's try it on the frame we made. So let's copy and paste this. Then the width, let's say, I don't know, 440. And you'll see here, it's not fully perfect because like all of this stuff, these guys aren't like scalable, but you will at least see that the actual creator stuff, it wraps properly and it doesn't like spill over. So there's like a small amount of things you would have to change if you were coding the responsive view, the mobile view of what you've done. But when you use auto layout, it saves your life. And it's like it's so similar to like coding with auto layout and the components. I was like, man, I need to like make a video about this because like none of my UX designer friends have ever mentioned this or how intuitive it is, and that's probably because they might not understand how like similar it is to actually coding, and it just saves you a ton of time when you're coding as well. But that is it. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, leave a comment. I make a lot of different types of videos. Sometimes I do tutorials. I actually have a startup. I'm going to start documenting the journey of my tech startup, trying to do things like getting to YC, make my first like $1 million in ARR and stuff like that. So if you want to see that type of content, make sure you subscribe and join my Discord, and I'll see you guys in the next video.